Hello and welcome to Riding in the Weeds. This is episode 83, and today we are here having an honest, vulnerable conversation about life and making progress. Because sometimes we just feel like we're not making progress. So you are here with me, Natasha Lockey. I am a life and mountain bike performance coach, and I'm all about helping you get clear with what it is you want your life to look like and starting to make progress into those places. And this is actually going to be a really fun conversation for me. I'm here with my amazing co-host, Ginny Branden. I will let her introduce herself.
Yeah, I'm Ginny Branden. I'm an animal communicator and energy healer for animals and their people too. If you are looking to add some depth to your relationship and explore a little bit about what your pet thinks about the world, then that is a great reason to have a session together.
As you are listening to this podcast, if you are thinking of people in your life that this would help, please share this podcast with your friends, your family. Number one, it makes people realize that you are thinking about them and that you love them. And number two, let's share the information that we have so that we can all help to become bigger and better in our lives. So today, Ginny and I have been sitting here kind of just shooting the shit, having a conversation about like everything. And we wanted to talk a little bit about progress and how in everything we do, we don't see progress immediately. And oftentimes you feel like you're taking 2 steps forward and 1 step back. And sometimes it feels like 1 step forward and 3 steps back. And I was listening to something recently that really struck me as really insightful. And it was that in the moment, we're not really making any significant change. Sometimes there are things that you can do. If you've been procrastinating on them for long enough, you feel like you're moving the needle forward. However, the little things, like if you don't let yourself get to the point where you've procrastinated on something so long that you're losing sleep on it, if you just make those little tiny steps every single day, they don't feel like a big deal. But the thing is, you won't actually get to the point where it is a big deal. You know, it's like you go to the mailbox and there's a pile of bills and your bank account is at zero, so you know you can't pay them, so you just don't open them. And then you go to the post office and you get another pile of bills and you still know you don't have any money, so you leave, and eventually you've got this stack of envelopes. You haven't opened any of them and you don't know what any of them say. You have no idea. Now you're dealing with a stack of envelopes, as opposed to if when you'd gotten the mail the first day, you'd opened those 5 envelopes, you'd seen what they were, and you had taken a step, even if it was just writing down, I need to pay this bill, this bill, this bill, and this bill. And now you've got a list of bills you need to pay. So the next step you can take is you can go into a budgeting app and you can start looking at how you're going to pay the bills. You are now taking little steps towards things. But what we do is we don't do anything because we can't actually move the needle forward on whatever it is. You are feeling like you're overweight. Well, sure, doing a 5-minute workout today, that's not going to do anything for you at all. But doing a 5-minute workout every day for the next 90 days, at the end of 90 days, you might actually see a difference. And if nothing else, you will feel like you have done something. But it's the action steps we take today are just helping us train towards being the person that we want to be in the future.
Yeah. I think the reality is that we grossly underestimate the power of the small steps. I was listening to Laura Michelle's podcast, Sovereign Storytellers, recently, and I was catching up on all her episodes I'd missed. And she talked about the fact that when you, quote, manifest something in your life, that the reality is that that thing, whatever it is that you have, quote, suddenly appeared in your life, that thing has been in the making for 6 to 9 months. So it's the actions that you took 6 to 9 months ago that led to the culmination of whatever appeared today. So the reality is that we are the product of our actions in the past. And that really struck me because so often it feels like we're not making any progress. We've talked about this before on the podcast. It's a common human issue, I guess, that it just feels like we're going nowhere. And it's so difficult sometimes to recognize the progress we have made. But I've had the experience that in the last month, I've been working with my trainer virtually because she doesn't come to Maryland in the winter. And so I've recorded pretty much every single ride that I've had over the course of probably a month to a month and a half. And we sit down together and we review them, generally one by one. What is really amazing to me is that she can spot the changes from ride to ride. And I might get 1 to 2 rides in a week. And that's it. It's not like, oh, this was Monday's ride and then I got 4 or 5 rides in and here's next Monday's ride. No, this is ride to ride. And she can see the differences in his response and how he's able to move and how strong he is and how he's landing his feet and the control he has over his body. And what's interesting is if you actually sit back and look at almost anything in your life, everything's like that. That even step to step, even if the steps don't feel like they're often enough, but step to step, there will be improvements and changes. And the only way to get there is by freaking putting your big kid britches on and just doing it. Like, there's no other way around it. That at some point, you just got to pull yourself up by the bootstraps and take those steps.
Yeah, it's so true. Right now, I am refusing to stand on the scale because every time I stand on the scale, I get like, oh, that's not what I wanted to see. And so I think about it. I'm like, oh, maybe I'll stand on the scale. I'm like, no, I'm absolutely not doing that because that is not a sign of progress. One of the reels that popped up recently was this reel of this guy, and he's like, yeah, you can be eating 1,000 calories a day, but you'll stand on the scale and you won't see any difference. And he's like, because this is how much water weighs and this is how much this weighs. And it's like, yeah, over a period of time, that calorie deficit will start to add up. I didn't eat today. I fasted all day today and then I stood on the scale. Like, you won't see a difference.
Yeah.
Trying to measure it in the right now is going to then discourage you. It's not going to be encouraging. So we have to really think of it like we are training ourselves to be whatever it is we want to be in the future. And if you're going to the gym, you're training yourself to be a fit person. If you're not in a relationship and you're looking to be in a relationship, taking those steps, taking yourself out to dinner and doing things that are for you and treating yourself in the way that you'd want to be treated by a partner, you are training yourself to be in a relationship. And that might not mean that you're in a relationship tomorrow or the next day or a year from now, but when you do get into the relationship, you have been in training for that relationship. I often think about where my finances are and things that didn't work well in my business. And I'm like, yeah, but I cannot be a multimillionaire if I don't manage my finances now. Because it doesn't matter how much money comes in, if I'm not managing it correctly, then it's just going to go out again. So I sometimes am like, okay, no, I am training. And with these little issues that I've got and these little nudges, I'm training myself to be able to deal with the big stuff. Because if you don't do well in one area, the bigger it gets, the bigger the problems get. When I was growing my business and I went from making hundreds of dollars to thousands of dollars to tens of thousands of dollars, and it was like, now I have tens of thousands of dollar problems. Before I just had $100 problems and I had $100 bills, and now I've got thousands of dollars coming. Well, now I've got $1,000 bills, and then now I've got $10,000 coming in. Well, that's great. Now I've got $10,000 problems. It wasn't like I had so much extra money. It cost more to make more money. And it was really interesting to notice that and be like, okay, so this isn't like work harder, make more money, you're going to be richer. It's the same with working out. It's not like if I work out 24 hours a day, Like now I'm going to have a whole lot of other problems. If I
Yeah.
don't eat enough food in the short term, it might give me a quick result, but it's not training to be the person that you want to be. And I just want to say,
Yeah.
to your point as well, you were talking about your trainer and her ability to see the progress. And the other day we were talking about how this coaching industry can be a little bit messy. It's not the right word, but I believe that the value we have with coaches and with counselors and with personal trainers and these people that come in and see where you're at and give you advice, but they don't just give you advice, they also can reflect back to you where you're at. And that's where, when you find somebody who can sit in the messy middle with you and be like, okay, these are the steps that if you take them, we will get to where you're going. And no, I'm not selling you the 6 figures in 6 days or launch your podcast in 30 days and have 20 million downloads. I'm selling you the let's do this one step at a time and we'll look at the progress.
Yeah. And I think that that is ultimately what it boils down to, is presence and focus. Those are the two things that come up over and over and over again on our show. How present are you with what's going on right now? What needs to happen? What is the next best step to take? And how strong is your focus on where you want to be? We've talked about this. You cannot look down when you go over anything on a horse or on a bike. If you look down, you're not going forward. You've got to stay focused on where you're going rather than just looking around right where you are. And it really is that simple. It's just not easy.
Well, and I think, like, to that point, though, I've been trying to get myself running, but I haven't been able to run on the terrain that I have around here right now, because if I don't look down at my feet the entire time, I'm going to trip over something. So it's really hard to look at where I'm going because I really need to stay focused on where I am. And it's very hard to run or ride a bike, or I don't know what it's like with a horse, but if you're not scanning, so what's in the now, what's in the next?
Yeah.
What's in the now?
Yeah.
What's in the next? And I think that is the conversation we're having right now. What are the things that I need to deal with right now in order for me to move to the next space? I've sold my business. I want to put it behind me. So what can I do right now? I can pay that $200 bill and I can make that one go away. I can file that tax form that I need to file so that that is up to date, and then I can deal with how I'm going to pay the bill. I can manage these things that are in the right now that I can deal with, and once they're gone, it's gone, right? I was listening to Mel Robbins the other day, and she was talking about ways to have a productive week. Step 1, do a mind dump. Dump everything that is in your brain onto a piece of paper. Step 2, cross out all the things that you're not going to deal with. Step 3, circle the things that you are going to deal with this week. Her example was that she has pictures that aren't on her walls. And every day for the last year, I have written down, put the pictures on the wall, and I've been like, I'm not going to do that this week. And because if we have all of this stuff floating around, we don't do anything. But if we can start to be honest with all of the things that we have to deal with, and then what's the one thing I can get off my plate this week? As you say, we will start to see progress, because we want to be like, who do you want to be? Where do you want to go? What progress do you want to make? And once you get really honest with yourself about that, you will start to open up the time to do it.
Yeah. And that's very true. And that's where it gets tricky, because we all have our own quirks and our idiosyncrasies and the little things about ourselves that create the ways that we have to go about it. And every single person is different.
Yeah.
Some people are going to thrive if they habit stack. I love that example from Mel Robbins. And if that's how you're going to be able to thrive, then that's what you should do. Some people are great at making lists. Whatever it is that works for you is what you have to employ. And you've always got to be on the lookout for that next tool that's going to make it for you. But the reality is no tool will work all the time, every time. That's not how the universe works. And you shouldn't beat yourself up over tools that don't feel useful to you. If habit stacking doesn't resonate with you, don't bloody do it. Find something else. You know, if you like the streaks, like that's part of what gets me through. When I want to make those small changes every day, if you give me a streak, man, then that's what I can push on. Like, well, I decided I meditate every day. That's just what I do. And then I get pissed at myself when I didn't. And that's whether I can see a result or not. But again, you're not going to see results after 1 day, 2 days, 5 days. Heck, you're still going to be getting results after 5 years. And that's what's important, though, is that you find the little thing that's going to get you through. Because there's going to be a day you're not going to want to do it. There's going to be a time when you're not going to want to take care of that thing that has been staring you in the face now for a while. And that's when you got to pull your big boy britches up or your big girl panties up and figure out how to make it happen. Because at some point, you have to be able to just parent yourself. At some point, you got to be able to just be the adult that you need yourself to be.
Well, I think what's really hard, too, is, you know, right now with my workouts, they're really hard. And I have been pretty consistent from, like, June of last year. I started doing workouts, and I fall off.
That's a long time, by the way.
Right. And I mean, we can take a look at my qigong and be like, oh look, I kind of was a bit spotty there for a while, but I've been doing these workouts, and yet, like, I'm doing my workout today, and I'm like, why aren't burpees getting easier? You know, and
because I don't think they do.
I mean,
it's a burpee.
I remember when they were easier than they are now. And I'm like, I am feeling like I'm wading through mud when I'm doing workouts. And I don't really feel like I'm getting that much progress. However, I'm also being challenged by this lethargy, which could be because I don't have enough iron in my body. I don't really know what's actually going on because I haven't been able to go and get these things tested. And it's frustrating. But what I do know is if I stop, that it's definitely not going to get better. So I'm really having to examine that on a daily basis. Like, okay, this is doing something for me. Even if I don't get stronger or lose any weight or whatever it is I'm trying to do, it's definitely better than the alternative, which is doing nothing. And as you say, it's those steps. And what I've been reminding myself is like, okay, so since I came back from Mexico, I have been consistent. I was consistent for almost 30 days. We then went away for a couple of days, and then we came back, and I'm like back on it. It wasn't that I wasn't active while I was away. I just wasn't doing my routine.
You're traveling. Yeah.
And I'm been noticing that what happened to me in September was I was really consistent, and then I went traveling. I dropped off for 10 days, and it took me until January to get really back on it again. And I guess as we get older, we lose it faster.
Damn it.
But, you know, I can say that my qigong tomorrow is day 30, and that's not quite 30 in 30 days, but it isn't 30 in 5 months. So
yay, see? And that's exactly what we said was going to happen, right? We talked about that when you had completed, quote, the 30 days in 5 months, your goal was to complete it in 4 months. And I said, well, what happens if you just complete it in 30 days? Yeah. And here we are. And I think that's something that often happens to us. In the beginning, those first steps are the hardest. They're the hardest to be consistent with. They're the hardest to keep moving on. And they're the ones that feel like they're giving us the least amount of return on our effort. And yet, once we get through that, it's not that it's smooth sailing, but it's like something shifts. And it just becomes easier in a way.
You can start to trust yourself. So like I did, I just looked up. So my day one.
You had to know now.
My day one was the 23rd of January. So, and we are now at the 6th of March. And I can look through this.
And February was only 28 days. So
there we go. And it's cool because I can look through and I can be like, yep, I was consistent. I can see where the gap was, because it tells me the last time I viewed these lessons. So I can actually go through, and I had 5 days where I didn't do it because we were away. So that's really like, that's pretty
So frankly,
close.
I mean, if you had 5 days where you were away, it's the 6th of March when we're recording this. That'd be the 1st of March. January was only 28 days.
Yeah, February.
So, yeah, February is only 28 days. January, 28 days. What the hell? Yeah, February is only 28 days. So technically, that kind of means that that'd be like February, if it was the 1st of March, it'd be like February 29th.
Right.
And so that means that you really only missed 3 or 4 days.
Which is
And I think traveling is one of those things where it's like, it is super hard to maintain rhythms and routines. I have a morning stretching flow routine that I do, and I often don't do it when I'm traveling. And then by the end of the travel, I'm like, oh, I need to do my thing. Like, I miss it. So sometimes those gaps actually show us what benefit we are getting. So I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, depending on what you're doing. Sometimes that missing it can really reveal the overall benefit. And you're like, oh, dang, that is something useful. I absolutely want that to be in my normal routine. And now I'm to the point where even when I travel, I still meditate every morning.
Yeah.
I may not do my flow routine, and I may not lay down with my knees up like I prefer to do, which helps my back and my neck. I regret usually not being able to do that, but sometimes it's just logistics of furniture and space and all of that. So I know the benefit of those things now. And now, even when I travel, it's still non-negotiable. Yeah. That has become so important to me that it is part of my routine that goes with me no matter where I go. Breaks are not bad though. And again, that sort of gives you a little bit of perspective on what happened and why you're choosing to do whatever it is you're choosing to do. And if it really is valuable to you, even when you're traveling, you'll find a way to do it in some iteration, in some form.
Absolutely. And so really, I guess this whole conversation is about that whole, like, we're training ourselves to get somewhere. We're not going to arrive at the destination necessarily right away. We have this trail in Roseland. It's called the Seven Summits. It's 36 kilometers long, 24 miles. And it's 5,000 vertical feet of climbing with 7,000 vertical feet of descending throughout the trail, right? It is a big commitment. And so I've had people that have come to me over the years like, Tash, do you think I'm ready for this trail? And what I've also seen is I've seen people do this trail before they're ready. And when you do that, it's like, I watched a friend of mine break his wife. Like, she didn't believe she was as good a biker as she was. She didn't quite have the endurance, and she didn't enjoy being on her bike enough to want to be on her bike for 6 to 8 hours, right?
Yeah, that's a lot. That's huge.
And for some people, it's nothing. Some people, it's actually only a 3-hour bike ride, right? Because that's the level they're at. But if it's going to take you 8 hours,
I will never be there. Just saying.
The record, I think, is 2 hours and 5 minutes, which, like, for your average human being, you have just made it to the first peak. It's 7 summits. You have literally just gone past.
God.
You're at the highest point. You've gone past the first summit. You're on your way to summit number 2. And that's at 2 hours. And these athletes that, you know, they're doing it, my brother would probably do it in 4 hours. My best has been 5 hours. Bobby and I actually, she ran and I biked it, and it was 5 hours that we did it in, which was super impressive for me, like totally stoked. But to my point, what I've seen is that it's like with anything, if you do something too much, Ian and I travel too far in one day when we're going to Mexico, if we put in too much, like, we actually can't do it the next day. Like, if I try and knock off too many to-dos on my to-do list in front of my computer in one day, and I like take my mojo and I get my ADHD overdrive, I end up the next day with a hangover, and it can take me weeks to get back up, right? I went to the gym while I was back home, and I went and did this hustle workout, and it really wasn't that hard. I was super impressed. Like, drop-in was $22, so I got to go to one for free with my girlfriend, and I was like, I'll go to another one. I'm like, meh. $22 to just go and not follow it up with anything wasn't going to get me anywhere. But what did happen is one of the exercises did something to my left butt cheek. And subsequently, I have been taking ibuprofen and I have been struggling. Like, I've had a couple of nights where I have not been able to sleep because the pain from my buttock was going into my back. It actually had a positive effect, though, because the only way to get through it was to isolate what exercises were really hurting it and do them more to get it moving again. So it meant that I wasn't going to stop working out. But it was too much, right? And I went too far, which puts you back a step. If you do the 7 Summits Trail before you're ready, I have seen people take entire seasons off of mountain biking because it literally made them hate the sport. And every time they go to get back on their bike, the memory that they have is of that pain. There's no joy associated with it, so they don't want to do that activity. It's the same thing if you are trying to knock off too many things on your to-do list. At the end of the day, you don't have this like feeling of accomplishment that makes you want to go back and do it again the next day. You're actually so drained and so tired that to think about doing more of that again, you're like, oh, but that just hurt. And we have to have a balance of the reward with the pain. If the pain and the reward are equal, better still, if the reward feels a little bit more than the pain, then we will want to do it again. At the end of my workout every morning, I give myself a yoga workout. I do my Qigong and I feel really good. When I get up in the next morning and I'm like, oh, but it's hard and I don't want to do it. Yeah, but it feels good at the end of it. You know that feeling you're getting, it's good. So we'll do that again to get to that feeling. And I think that, if nothing else within this conversation, that's what we really have to think about. What are you training to be? What is that good feeling you want to have? And making sure that every time you take a step, you get that little rush of dopamine that makes you want to come back and do it again. And always staying within that limit that allows you to remember the next day, the next time you're doing it, to remember the pleasure versus just feeling that pain.
Yeah. Well, and the tricky part is that in a lot of things that in the beginning, you may not even get that pleasure thing. And that's where your focus has to be so tight on the reason why you're doing the thing that you can get past that discomfort. And I think the other challenging part about it is that frequently the way we figure out that we did too much is because we did too much. I know that I've had this experience numerous times. I've had multiple surgeries in my life. And the last one back in 2009, I had knee surgery and I was non-weight bearing and locked straight for 6 weeks, which is not fun. My mom came up to stay with us for like 2 weeks because I was so immobilized and I was still taking pretty heavy drugs for quite a while. So I wasn't able to drive because the pain was pretty bad. And I remember the first day, like, I don't even know how many days it had been at this point. It was probably like a week. And I hadn't left the house. It was outpatient surgery, but the anesthesia just wrecks me. So we decided to go get lunch. And this is literally the first time I've left the house since I've come home. And I get in the backseat of the truck so I can just sort of slide up in the truck rather than having to sit down because that doesn't work very well with a bum leg. And I remember coming home after lunch and I was exhausted. And the reality was it was probably too much for me, even though I'm sure it had been days since I had my surgery. Like I said, you're in that drug haze. Like, you don't remember anything. I'm sure it had been over a week at that point. And yet it was still completely physically exhausting. And sometimes that's how we figure out, ooh, I just bit off a little more than I can chew. Maybe we should have put me in the car and gone and picked up lunch and come home. That might have been better, or maybe I should have ridden in the car to go get gas or something and not put all of the exertion into it. But I'm fine, clearly, because that was like 15 years ago, so I'm fine. And we lived through it. and we figure out how to keep going, and hopefully we don't give up on whatever it was that we overdid ourselves with. But figuring out how to recognize where your limit is, it's a learning experience through life. But being able to know this step is going to be too much for me. We were down in Key West in January for my brother-in-law's wedding, and my in-laws wanted to go snorkeling super bad. And that's cool. I've never been snorkeling. I'm not really even a great swimmer. And when I actually stopped to think about it, I haven't swam, like outright swam, in probably 15 or 20 years. Because there's just nowhere for me to do that. I have floated in pools, which is lovely, but I have not swam. And so I told her, I said, look, I need to make sure you're okay if I do this with you guys, if I don't get in the water at all. Because I'm not going to tell you outright no right now, but I know myself, I know my limits, and there's a big chance that we'll get out there in this boat and I'm going to tell you no. And sure enough, the day we get ready to go out, it is like 60 degrees, cloudy, 15 to 25 mile an hour winds. Turns out the boat's a catamaran, which means it's a completely open deck. No cabin, nowhere to get out of the wind. And I'm like, yeah, that's a hard nope. I am not going to go swimming and then sit in 15 to 25 mile an hour winds on a moving boat. Because you know what would happen? I would instantly be blue and shaking because I would not be able to get my body warm enough after having been in the water. I know that. I know myself. I knew that step was too big. So guess what? We're now members of our Y. Guess what they have? A pool.
It's funny.
Guess what I'm going to start doing is swimming.
I hadn't even until you were talking just now. I was like, yeah, cool. You're going to go swimming. I didn't actually put those two stories together. And that's super cool. One of the things I used to say when I was teaching mountain biking was you want to find your limits. When you're going around a corner, people will try and turn too soon because they're subconsciously afraid they're going to fall off the edge of a corner. No one falls off the edge of the corner. That doesn't happen,
True.
Right?
You go off the inside.
You go off the inside. And I started to tell people, I'm like, you know what? Ride to the edge of the corner and get to the point where you're almost going to fall off. Find that limit, because if you don't know where that limit is, your ceiling might be way higher than what you imagine. Like you can, in this example, you can ride so far into that corner before you turn. Like I would say where most people try and turn, you can go like 3/4 more past that point. If it's 100%, like people are like getting to 25% and then trying to do the corner and wondering why they're not making it. If they like totally go that much further, so it's like go to the point where you're almost going to fail. The point is you're going to fail anyway if you do it the way you've been doing it. So push it till you hit that limit and see where the limit is, right?
Yeah.
We do an exercise where to find the edges of your bike, like push yourself all the way back and see if you can butt rub with your tire, right? And then put yourself all the way forward and see how uncomfortable it is. Now you know how big that bicycle is and you know how far you actually have to go before you're gonna hit the back tire. People do 25% of the actual reality. And so then when you're in a situation, you don't realize, right? And so it's like finding the limits and then deciding whether you can push past it or whether you can't. And you were like, this is going to put me at my limit. This is the conditions under which I will push past that limit. And these are the conditions under which I will not push past this limit. And now you're like, yeah, but I don't want to be limited by that anymore. Probably if it was really cold, you go swimming every day for the next year and then you're back in Key West and you want to go snorkeling and it's the same day, there's a good chance you still won't go in the water because you can't fix that cold issue. However, you can totally do something about being more comfortable in the water. The more comfortable you are in the water, the more you're actually willing to be cold. If now you're like, the experience I'm going to have is worth being cold afterwards.
Suffering.
Right? Or you're like, okay, so I know that that boat's going to be like that. I have this really big fluffy dressing gown that's made out of toweling. So I'm going to take that with me. Yeah. So when I get out of the water, I can immediately put that on. I'll be comfortable for a moment, I'll let myself warm up, then I will dry myself and I will get changed. You'll start to understand the steps that you need to take because you know where the limit is. You know the parts of that limit that you can control, and you know the parts that you can't control. So we start to figure it out as we become more comfortable. But again, in that situation, there were so many things that were going to not work. And at the baseline, it was that you're just not comfortable in the water. So what can you control? Action step in this moment is I can spend more time in the water. That is something that I can control. I can't control the weather. I can't control how I react to hot and cold, but I can control whether I'm comfortable swimming or not, because there are sometimes there's that key thing that if you can pull that out, everything else starts to change, and then you're dealing with something else. You're like, okay, well, what's the next thing that I need to deal with? Same thing when you're on your bicycle, right? If you are not balanced on your bicycle, or if you feel like you're limited, figure out what's the key problem here that you can actually change by taking a small step every day. I've realized that I'm really unbalanced. So I'm trying to do more exercises that require me to be on one leg, because we don't want to be unbalanced, because that's what ends you up in old people's homes.
Well, but improving your balance is going to improve your bike riding.
I'll improve my bike riding.
You know.
It'll improve my whatever is this muscle that I like totally whacked out. Has probably got a lot to do because it's the glute muscle. It's probably the medius and the maximus, and that is a result of me not working on certain muscles because of injuries that I've had and things that happened. And it's like, okay, now that those things don't exist, I can start working on that.
Yeah.
Just a little bit. And that's how we start to figure out what are the steps that we can take that will allow us to see the progress. Back to your swimming, right? What is the key step that you could take that is going to allow your world to open up a little bit more next time? When you come to visit me in Mexico, we're going to have to go swimming in the ocean. So it's not going to be cool if you're really hot and you don't want to get in the ocean because it's a scary surf beach. That's not going to be cool, right? So that will open your world. So what is it that you're training for that allows you to move into a space further down the road?
Yeah. And really, the kind of key in that whole scenario for me is that I was able to observe. And I love when I can watch something that I want to explore, but that I know is out of my range. When I can just sit there and observe how everything works, I loved it. I had a great time. I had thoroughly enjoyed my boat ride. That's what I checked in with her before. I'm like, look, as long as you're okay with me just taking a boat ride. And thankfully it was inexpensive enough that I didn't feel like I was cheated out of anything. I thought it was a great value for what I got. I was perfectly happy with it. And so being able to look at that, and now I can start swimming. And you know what? I'm going to get a mask. I'm going to get my own snorkeling mask so I can go be the weirdo in the Y pool with a snorkeling mask on. I'll probably eventually put the little thingy on there. Who knows? I don't know whether they allow fins in the pool or not, but I might get some fins so that I can try it out in a scenario that gives me the ability to explore without worrying about it.
What?
And so being able to break those tasks down and address the little bits in different pieces, eventually I can bring them all back together again. And not everything can be taken apart that way, which is definitely a challenge for me sometimes. Because riding horses, you kind of got to be able to manage like all the things at once.
Yeah, but
you can focus on different areas, but if you focus too hard on one area, something else slides, and that can get tricky. But it's helpful to be able to use that technique whenever you have an opportunity.
I think, though, that comment comes from someone that knows all the things. When you don't know all the things, there's less things to know, and it's easier to break it down. My experience of snorkeling and the issues that I face when I'm snorkeling are things that you don't even know about right now, right? And so
I'm sure
as we expand things, we find more things. That's actually the beauty of teaching beginners, is that you've only just overcome a few obstacles. So there's not like 100 things that you know about to share. You're like, yeah, I had that problem last week and this is how I overcame it, right? And now I have this new problem. But until you overcome that, you don't actually see all of the new problems. And then as you get better and better and better, you're like, oh my God, there's so many things to manage. But you now have the skills to manage all those things.
It's the nuance in the layers that you can explore.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's part of what I love about riding. That's part of why I love riding the horses, is because there is so much nuance involved. And really good riders look like they're doing nothing. And I can 100% assure you that is never the case.
It's like in yoga, right? That looks like a static position, but actually there's 500 things going on right now in order to stay in that static. And then I just wanted to mention as well, back to your snorkeling, you know, you still went and had that enjoyable experience. You were still with them, even though you didn't snorkel. Bobby and I went and did the 7 Summits. Bobby's not a big mountain biker. She was definitely not wanting to mountain bike the 7 Summits, but she loves to run. And she wanted to run the 7 Summits. So she called me. She's like, I'm going to do the 7 Summits. Do you want to come with me? And I was like, sure. So she ran and I biked. You go faster when you're running up a hill than you do when you're biking up a hill. And obviously, when you're riding down a hill, you're going faster than someone running down a hill. So she got to the top of the first bit. We actually watched the eclipse from the top. It was really cool. And then we went down the other side. So off I went. And then as I started climbing back up, she passed me. And it was like, hey, how's it going? Sweet, cool. We did it together, but she was running and I was biking. Yet we were still able to both have an experience together out there on the trail, and we saw each other and chatted as much as we would have if we were both running or we were both biking. She could have called me. I'd be like, well, I'm not going for a run, so that's not going to work. And then we wouldn't have done it, right? Whereas that wasn't what was proposed. It was like, okay, well, I'm going to go and do the 7 Summits. You want to come? And we're going to do it with 2 different modalities because that's where we both thrive. And we have this joint experience even though we weren't together the entire time. And that's okay, right? As we said earlier, how can you make something work for you? Mel Robbins says, do a brain dump. And I'm like, I'm not ready to do that. I don't want to do that. So what I have been doing instead is I've got my notepad, and every time something comes up for me, I'm like, oh yeah, that's right. I want to buy that thing. And so I'm writing it down on my list of things I want to buy. Oh, I've got to get that thing done. And I'm writing it down on my list. And it might not be tomorrow, it might not be the next day, but I will start to train myself to the point where actually sitting down and doing a brain dump feels possible for me.
Yeah.
That seems so
breaking
stupid,
it down.
Right? But I can either sit in resistance and then be like, I'm going to force myself to do this, or I can start to make small steps towards the end goal.
Yeah. Well, when you say that it's stupid that you can't do something, you're berating yourself. And so therefore, it's going to make actually doing it even harder, especially if you're talking about something that you can't avoid, like your taxes or your financial stuff or whatever it is. There's a lot of adulty things that we have to do that we can't avoid doing. And if you are beating yourself up over the fact that it's hard for you,
it's not getting
it's only going to make it that much harder. So you might as well just be okay.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, it is really hard for me. I struggled last year with my financial tracking. It's a terrible thing. I have sworn year over year that I will never let it get this bad. And then last year was one of my worst years when it came to tracking. And it took me so much longer to get it done. But the longer I sat there and just resented myself for not being able to get to it, the harder it was to start. So if you just go, yeah, well, I'm just not doing that today. It's just not going to happen today. If I had beat myself up over the fact that I couldn't go snorkeling, that I was too chicken to go snorkeling, I wouldn't be able to even think of learning to do it. And so just knock that off. It's not beneficial to yourself. It doesn't help you get anything done. And don't worry about it, and just be okay with where you are and continue to take whatever the smallest step is that you can. And that's how I got my financial tracking done. I just broke it down.
Yeah.
I employed my boyfriend's help. I drug him in on it because I was like, I can't get this done without support. So I had him body doubling, and I put him to work on pulling some of the information together for me because I'm like, it's going to take me 10 times longer if I don't have your help. And so we knocked it out and had our appointment with our accountant the other week. and got it taken care of. And I've already started on 25. Now that 24 is wrapped up, I'm getting 25 going so that I'm not behind. My goal is by probably the end of the weekend to have February and January done. So then I can just be relaxed for the rest of March. And then at the beginning of April, we get March done. And that's all I have to worry about. And it's not a big deal anymore.
It's so funny because I had the same experience with my timesheet for the work on the farm. And I hadn't done it. And I'm like, I'm not going to get paid if I don't do this. And so I sat down and did it. Well, it was the 22nd or the 23rd. And we were leaving on the 24th. And I'm like, at this point, I may as well just do the other one that's not due till the 28th, but there's something going to be added. And so I just kept going. And so then I was ahead. I'm like, well, that feels good. Not only have I done the bit that I've been avoiding, but I'm now actually ahead of the game. And so yesterday when I had to send my invoice in, it took me 5 minutes because I'd already done it. And I'm like, sweet. I also hadn't been paid yet for the past one. So I sent them both to him. I was like, hey, just a nudge. And I got paid for both of them. He felt bad for not having paid the last one on time. So I got paid for both of them. And I went from being broke to having money in my bank account. I'm like, look at me go. I focused. The beginning of the day, I was like, oh my goodness, this is not a good situation. By the end of the day, I was like, well, look at me, I'm rich. And now I better figure out what I'm going to do with this money. Rich might be an overstretch, but it's definitely improvement of what it was. And it was just purely managing the situation. Right? I've got an invoice I got to write. I haven't been able to get into my invoicing software. And I'm like, well, I'm not going to get that money if I don't take care of this little admin detail. And now I've taken care of the admin detail. I don't have anything in my way to not finish it up. So if this has been helpful, please share this with someone you know. Honestly, this has kind of just been a vulnerable conversation between Ginny and I of just life is life. And when we get stuck in the weeds, there's only one way out, and it is one step at a time. And if you've gotten to the end of this episode, you're with us, you probably understand what we're talking about. And so again, if you know someone, please share this episode. Please like, comment, subscribe. We love to hear from you. Hopefully these conversations are really helpful. I know I really enjoy them. I know that Ginny enjoys the conversation, and we're really hopeful that this resonates with you. I'm Natasha Lockey. I am a mountain bike life performance coach. You can find me on Betty Go Hard on Instagram. You can find me Natasha Lockey on Facebook, and I am also on Substack. Not as much as Ginny would like me to be. It's Natasha Lockey. And you can find the podcast at Writing in the Weeds. So writingintheweeds.com will get you to our Substack, and you can also find us on Spotify and Apple as well. What about you, Ginny?
Yeah, I'm Ginny Branden. I'm an animal communicator and energy healer for animals and their people too. If you are having behavior challenges or relationship challenges with your pet, emotional issues, or you've got some big life experiences happening and just want to check in with your pet about what's going on and make sure that everybody's on the same page, that's a great time to book a session. You can find me on the web at soulpetconnections.com and on Substack, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube under the same handles. So again, to echo Tosh, we appreciate you being in here and hanging out with us in the weeds, and we look forward to seeing you next time.
Thanks, everyone.